This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. In each episode, we bring you information, insights, and ideas from some of the industry's top thought leaders. Connect with us to help pick the topic and guide the show.
This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. I'm your host, Jamie Wood. Our topic today, fanatical forecasting. Now, I'll be the first to admit forecasting is not a strength of mine. Given my role, that's probably a little bit of a surprise. But what I can say with a bit of authority is that I've led media sales teams for just over a decade now. The best performing media sales professionals are excellent at forecasting. There are rarely exceptions to this rule either. Forecasting, I get it. It's kind of perceived as a bit of a laborious task. A lot of people do it very begrudgingly at the last minute or at the request of their manager. They flick it off into the abyss and then they carry on with their week. However, forecasting is a secret weapon for media sales professionals. When you do it well, it allows you to unlock new pockets of opportunity. It allows you to uncover new insights that you can exploit. It allows you to predict and avoid potential shortfalls to your revenue number. And most importantly, it's about optimization for performance, right? If you can do a deep analysis of what does and doesn't work, you can do more of what does and less of what doesn't. It allows you to stop wasting time on low return activity. Our returning guest is a good friend of mine, Alex Whitlock. Alex is the Joint Managing Director of Momentum Media. It's one of the country's leading trade media, market intelligence, and professional events businesses.
Media Sales Mastery.
We're getting into the weeds today. This is one of the most requested topics, believe it or not, from the audience is what is forecasting all about? A lot of people say that they're quite frustrated by forecasting. They feel that it's a tick and flick exercise and it's this big report that goes up to management and doesn't really offer much utility for themselves. But let's kind of go back to basics, mate. Like, what is forecasting in the context of media sales and why must we do it?
Great question, Jamie. Look, forecasting, it may seem like a bit of a tedious topic to some people, but it's one of the most critical functions in media sales for sales representatives, for sales directors, and indeed for the organization itself. Forecasting really gives everybody a roadmap as to where they're headed. And in any market conditions, this is absolutely critical. It is really, really important for the salesperson to know where they're traveling over the next period, be that the next quarter, 6 months, or over the course of the 12-month period. It's equally as important for those that are helping to guide the sales representatives, along their path. And it's really, really critical for the organization to know where they're heading. Otherwise, you end up in a bit of a sort of a rudderless vessel, being tossed around by market conditions. You never really know whether you've been successful or whether you've, undershot on an organizational level and an individual level. I personally really enjoy forecasting. I think it's a really rigorous opportunity to look at the marketplace, to look at your media brand, to look at what you're expecting to come in a collaborative sense, from an organizational level at the top, the very top tier, all the way through down, to those that are at the coal face. It's an opportunity to dig in deep, have a look at what's happened over the previous period, see where there is opportunity to grow, and then to sort of set that down as targets. And I say targets, I believe that forecasts should be interwoven with incentives for success, and that should really permeate all the way down through the sales structure, from those that are responsible for bringing the revenue in and working with the client, and there should be reward for everybody throughout that process.
So in terms of the director level position you sit in, where you're a co-owner of the business, when you're compiling your business forecast or you're putting together a forecast specifically for one of the titles or brands or products, what are you typically looking to uncover through that process? Like, what are the signs of a healthy versus an unhealthy forecast?
Yeah, you raise a very, very important point, Jamie. Forecasts they're an indication and a chart of what lies ahead, but it's not set in stone. It's very, very, very tricky, and it's very, very difficult. You want to really map, what lies ahead, but it's also critical that you make your forecasts with a robust process. So rather than plucking figures from the air or simply looking at past performance and expecting to see the same fall into place over the coming period, from a director and from a leadership level, you've got to really interrogate what's happening in the marketplace. For us at Momentum Media, we have 20 different verticals and many different products within those verticals. So our forecasts are sort of fairly sophisticated and fairly complex. And I'm sure many people tuning in will find themselves in a similar position. So rather than being a headline figure on any one brand, we look very deeply into those individual brands, and we will go down to quite a sort of a granular level, and we will start to look at forecasting different revenue lines, be that digital advertising, being it sponsorships for events, be it sponsorships for podcasts, live streams, so on and so forth. So it's an opportunity, I think, for everyone to join together and to analyze and look and see what is happening, over the coming period. Now, you need to take into consideration in your individual portfolios what headwinds you're facing, and sometimes these will be general economic situations. Currently in Australia, we are in a spiraling cycle of inflation, very, very unpredictable. There are all sorts of factors taking place externally, not least of all, war in the Ukraine, tensions regionally, challenges to China in terms of its struggling with its own economy as it battles COVID. So you've got these kind of external environmental things. But then as you start to look into your portfolios, for us, for example, maybe looking at law or wealth, there are certain things which impact those markets, which will be maybe unique to that particular portfolio, but may sort of filter into all the other portfolios that we are working on. Forecasting is really a guiding light for everyone. And if you get it wrong, it can actually be really quite disheartening if your forecasts are too high, because you end up with salespeople and sales leaders becoming despondent because you're setting them a task that is unachievable. If your forecasts are too low, there's a danger at an organizational level that you will not be successful in extrapolating the maximum revenue out of your marketplace.
It's a good point, because you're sort of talking of like top down versus bottom up. So at a macro business level, you're looking at the forecast, you're looking at what could potentially happen, but then you need to have that input from the people on the front lines who are plugged into the marketplace. In terms of a media sales professional who is plugged into the market, who is putting a forecast together, where should they start? Like, what is the ideal sequence for them in terms of moving through and having a really robust forecast at the end of that process?
Before we sort of dive into where the salesperson at the coalface should be working on their forecast, I'd like to go a little bit more detail as to how we work on this as an organization. So we will closely analyze the past quarter. Now, we have incentives for our salespeople every quarter upon going ahead of a forecast. So what this means is, as your sales team strive to get towards the level that we've sort of pre-agreed and worked on as being, so the forecast for that particular quarter, there is an incentive and a kicker that comes in. So what happens? They tend to pedal very hard once they're approaching that level, and with the idea of getting up and above. Now, what this does, Jamie, it not only rewards people for hard work, but it also helps set the forecast for the coming quarter. So we can look at, if our forecasts, are a little bit on the low side, our sales team get an opportunity to go above and to earn significant revenue. But we will then look at this and factor that into the forecast ahead. So that's us on an organizational level. It's critical that we involve the salesperson. If we don't get the salesperson's vision and view of what they believe to be possible, we're setting ourselves or setting up the salesperson for failure. So it is vital that they are involved in the forecasting. So typically we will have a forecast that we expect based on the data that we analyze. So that's us at an organizational level. The portfolio head will also have their input. They're just that bit closer to the coalface, and they will use their insights to forecast what they're expecting. But we will then also work with the salespeople or the salesperson on that brand, and we will look for them to say what they are expecting. And it's critical that you involve the salesperson, because they are there at the front line. So, for example, you may get certain anomalies that have happened in the previous quarter. There may have been a client that has dumped a significant amount into the previous quarter that isn't going to be replicated again. So if you don't involve the salesperson, you're not going to understand that revenue isn't going to be there for the following quarter. There may also be mergers, acquisitions, and changes in terms of some of the key stakeholders, some of our key clients. So you have to involve the salesperson so they can give you their expectation of where they think they're going to land. Now, there is a level with salespeople where there is going to be a level of incentive around hitting forecasts. you could, fairly argue that they may well lowball on their forecasts, but you have to give them the opportunity to quantify where they're going. If they put a forecast in that's low, you will ask them to back that up and to explain why that's falling short. But generally, we typically find, Jamie, that our salespeople will forecast slightly lower than us or the sales director. Occasionally, the sales director will forecast slightly higher, and we will then use, a very sort of analytical view of the data that's available to us to put our forecast in place. Through that, then you end up with kind of, sort of a couple of parallel lines of what we would hope to bring in, and then maybe sort of a level of where we would think that the maximum would be. We do, of course, not incentivize our salespeople at the maximum. If you do that, it becomes impossible for them to be rewarded, and they fairly quickly become despondent. You may see the first quarter with those kind of tactics with a sort of better than usual performance, but fairly quickly salespeople become disenchanted with the process. So you set your level of target where there's going to be bonuses and remuneration below what you're expecting at a level that you're comfortable, and you hope they really sort of overshoot.
Yeah. It sounds almost like what you're saying there, like it's part art, part science. Like you've got these hard metrics and you've got these different mathematical tools that you can use, but then it does come down to a bit of a subjective analysis of the marketplace and some of those different factors that might be different from historical. I'm curious as to how that translates to pipeline health. Like, how does a media sales professional typically categorize different pieces of business in a pipeline, be it really high likelihood of landing or very, very speculative or at a lot of risk of potentially not occurring or being lost to a competitor? Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of how you encourage your guys and girls to really sort of look at different pieces of business and their likelihood, and how that ladders up to an overall forecast number?
You raised a really interesting point there, Jamie. And this is one of the, I guess, vulnerabilities of forecasting. So if you're on a mature product with a sort of a very stable, regular client base, that you can look back over a period of years and you can see that there are patterns in terms of the spend. The same stakeholders are there. Their revenue may fluctuate slightly. You'd hope that it sort of grows, but it becomes easier in some ways to start to predict that revenue. And I say that with a caveat. You can, if you're not careful, you can become complacent, and you can look at a portfolio and go, oh, well, it's, kind of growing at 10% per year. So, we shall just expect that it continues to grow at 10%. Whereas with more robust forecasting and working with that particular group and actually really sort of, digging deep into what's happening in that portfolio, you may be able to unearth potential to grow at a more robust rate. But the issue, Jamie, is if you have a new brand. So we've got a number of brands that we've launched fairly recently. We've got a portfolio that's just launched in HR, for example. We have another one in cybersecurity. Very, very new brands. They are finding their footing in their particular marketplace. We are starting to kind of find our feet also with the main stakeholders in those fields. So, of course, how do you forecast? Well, it becomes really a sort of a stab in the dark exercise if from day one you launch a brand and you forecast and offer incentives to a salesperson around a forecast with sort of a wetted finger held in the air. That equally, can become quite sort of disheartening for the salesperson if they fall short of the forecast you've conjured up. Equally, if you get your forecast wrong and they absolutely way overshoot, you can end up paying out, sort of ridiculous bonuses. So we have a rule of thumb that in the first 12 months, we don't forecast on new brands, and we will really sort of play it by ear as we go into the second 12 months, or the second year of that brand's presence, as we start to understand and assess the marketplace. So, that's a couple of things to consider. Looking at a normalized portfolio, though, you've got really kind of two categories of revenue that comes in. And one of that is, as I said, from existing clients. From an established portfolio, you will end up with, maybe 75, maybe 60, maybe 80% of your revenue comes from established and fairly predictable sources. And on those kind of clients, you've really got to look at how the salesperson has managed those. They need to look and see what the trends are with those individual clients, and based on understanding the whole of their media objectives. For example, most major spenders aren't only spending with your media brand. You're usually part of a bigger media mix. So for the salesperson to actually understand where their brand sits in that overall mix helps them then to start working on how that how that revenue may grow, or hopefully not, but may shrink over the coming year. Much harder for salespeople to start to build accurate forecasts if they are dealing with new clients and new business. This becomes very, very tricky and very challenging, and I'm sure many people tuning in will understand what I'm saying. It's the longer you've been selling and the better you are at selling media and the more effective you are at understanding clients and understanding needs and really pinpointing opportunity, the better you get at predicting. But it really is still very speculative, and you might feel that with a prospect that you stand a 80% chance of landing the business, and based on your expectations, you've given them 3 options, that they're going to go for the second option, which is going to be worth $50,000. It's really hard for salespeople to actually really sort of put their neck on the line around that type of forecasting, because they're taking a big risk, right? If they are very bullish about their ability to close new business, they can end up getting caught short and being hung, drawn, and quartered because they haven't hit the forecast they've set. On the other hand, if they are too conservative, you may end up with a greatly reduced forecast for new business where, perhaps, you then end up paying out greater incentives. So yeah, it's quite a tricky role for salespeople at the coalface to really look down. It's much easier for established business. Gets much harder if you're working on sort of new accounts or new business.
Well, that was one of the parts of your business I find fascinating, Alex. You obviously have a number of large-scale events that you run around the country that have, upwards of 1,000 guests, and there's a lot of logistics, and sometimes, or in many cases, I'm sure if it's a new event like a business awards or something like that, it's an unproven product, but it's a product that's probably got a lot of expense and a lot of capital and a lot of logistics behind it. What does that process look like in terms of building out an accurate business forecast, and how do you use forecasting as a tool to obviously mitigate any risk or downside of lost capital?
Yeah, another very good point. I'm sure many people tuning in will be in a similar situation. We run in the region of 70 events a year. There is a significant liability with events, great expenses, for venue, for F&B, for AV, and a host of other things, not to mention that, the softer costs around sort of staffing and travel and so forth. So really, really, really delicate balance in terms of getting your forecasting right. I'll just give you a quick scenario, which you may find interesting and certainly help me understand some, as a salesperson, really some science and some really valuable sales tactics also around forecasting. And I learned this when I went to go and work for Dow Jones in the late 90s. I worked on a weekly publication called the Far Eastern Economic Review, which is sadly no longer around. And I was brought into that organization because of my skill set and knowledge, particularly around the funds management industry in Asia, and particularly sort of, those based in Hong Kong. So I hadn't been working for, for the Far Eastern Economic Review for very long, and the board over in the States wanted to expand the really sort of the reach with the publication and also tap into some new revenue sources. So they asked me to launch a quarterly Asian funds focus, which I was very, very keen to do. And of course, was ready to get on the phone and start selling as I always had done, being wired the way that I'm wired. But they said, look, you need to go away because of the cost for Dow Jones to do this properly. They need to have an accurate forecast as to what I was expecting to go in, to bring in through this, which was really put me under a lot of pressure as being the salesperson, not the sales manager. So I had to kind of create my own forecast. So it was a very, very valuable process. So I thought, well, how on earth am I going to go and do this? I thought, well, the way to do it is, I know all of the senior decision makers in all of the funds that are based, sort of in and around Asia. So I basically promoted and sold them on the idea. Look, I went along to all of them and said, I'm driving an initiative to bring a major focus on Asian funds and their importance into the Far Eastern Economic Review. This is obviously going to go out to a global audience, very, very valuable for those in the, in the funds industry. In order for me to be successful in this, I understand your industry and I know how important it is for you to, to have this in this publication. I need to present to the board. So first of all, in principle, are you interested? Yes, I am, Alex. So once I got the yes, I am, I then said, okay, well, look, I need to get an idea of what the revenue is. There's a significant cost to this. In principle, would you be interested in a full page, full circulation, global circulation, a full page Asia Pacific, so on and so forth. So, and then the final thing I said is, look, if I get this to go ahead, will you go ahead and do this? And I logged those three criteria, and and ended up with yes, we think it's of value. We do a full page for the full circulation, and yes, we go ahead if you get this secured. It was a really interesting process for me to go through. I pre-sold to all of the prospects. It was also interesting because you're bringing them in, you're binding them into this particular initiative right at the coalface, and people get excited about that. And so, I had this, and then I had a very, very clear picture. I had 9 different organizations said they would participate. I went to the board and presented. I was extremely nervous. They actually flew over to Hong Kong, came over from the States, and it went ahead. Really, really interesting. I not only got the 9 organizations in that said they would come in, I got an additional advertiser in. So I beat my own forecast, and I was really, really, really accurate and very, very much on the money for what they were expecting. So I apply the same thing to launching events. So I will, when we have a new event coming up, I will go along and engage the marketplace. I will share with them my vision of the impact it's going to have, the value for those that are going to be involved, the very significant value for our partners, and it will be usually and in principle, and I will line up different organizations for very finite opportunities. I like to have a limited number, usually 6. I'll have a principal partner, maybe 2 platinums, and and then 3 additional, depending on the size of the marketplace. So I very much like to go into this saying, well, I've only got 6 opportunities. They're going to go very quickly. I'm just trying to line you up at this particular time. Where would you see yourselves being positioned, so on and so forth. And then obviously I will have decided what the overall revenue I want to bring in. I will then chunk that up between principal, platinums, and golds, or whatever it may be. So that's the way that I will go about, sort of focusing on a new event. With an established event, it is slightly different. You've obviously got the success and the number of delegates or attendees or finalists or whatever it may be, whether it's a conference or awards for the previous year. So it's really then about delivering excellence to your sponsors and your partners when the awards or when the conference is taking place, having absolute excellence in everything you do, to really then go ahead and I try and look for our sales team to go and to secure that revenue for the next year, whilst all the sponsors and partners are still feeling really excited and happy and passionate and pleased with the data that they've achieved or the branding that they've secured. So it is really important to get forecasting right. In certain instances, we will look to increase our spend on overhead such as speakers, or maybe at a bigger and better venue. So yeah, the forecasting for this is really, really important, but it's also an opportunity very much in that kind of scenario to pre-sell.
I think you raise a great point there, mate, around having more opportunity than maybe available inventory and or available opportunities. So having more interested clients who are vying for a sponsorship than available sponsorships is a really important part of forecasting and gap planning and building pipeline, isn't it? It's about de-risking the likelihood that things are going to fall over, because things, invariably do fall over in what we do. Budgets don't get signed off, things get delayed, products get pushed back, marketing managers leave. So the ability to actually build in additional opportunity to ensure that should all these things happen, you can still actually hit that number is so critical. And I'd say as a sales director, one of the things I find really interesting is that very rarely am I called upon to deliver an optimistic forecast. What they actually want to know is my worst case scenario. What is the absolute walk away number that will come in? Because critical business decisions get made based on that revenue coming in. And obviously, it's great, like you said earlier, to be able to surpass what your forecast is. That's always fantastic. But what do we do? And this is probably leading to my next question. What do we do if a forecast comes up through a process and it looks like the salesperson is going to miss their target? What might be some of those next steps that they can actually look at taking in order to close out that gap to their target?
Yeah, this is really getting to the to the crux of the matter, isn't it? Really, forecasts are there to help steer salespeople through. There are times where, we at any one given time, there will be one portfolio out of our 20 odd that will look like it's not going to hit forecast. So what do you do as a leader? Well, I think you have to listen to the salesperson first of all, understand what the mitigating factors are. You need to see if, maybe a major client has dropped off. Maybe there's been some major incident or a change in policy. Maybe something's happened during that period that has struck them off target in terms of hitting that forecast. I think the good thing with forecasting is, and the good way that certainly media sales in our environment works, is we can see the bricks being laid down quite early. We can see the forward booking. So once you're into your quarter, really you've already got sort of bookings for the quarter ahead. So we're quite good at seeing this early. So if we see that a salesperson is falling short, look, you need to look and make sure that they're following best practice in terms of what they're doing. That's the first and foremost thing. Are forecasts falling short because something beyond their control has taken place, or are they not maybe being as effective in their job as possible? Let's assume that they are doing everything that's required of them. There's then an opportunity for us as sales leaders to come in and to start look. And this is one of the things that I really love about media sales and sales in general. You get a chance to come and look and say, okay, how are we going to fix this? How are we going to get this back on track? And in my opinion, if the salesperson isn't at fault, it's not a matter of cracking the whip above their head. I think there's an opportunity to start being creative, to look at their portfolio, to maybe sit down with them and have a look at where the key sort of hotbed of spend typically is. Maybe it lies in technology, and then to sit around and then say, okay, well, we're going to have a special focus. Why don't we launch this particular week on our media brand, a focus on this particular area of technology? It'll be a dedicated week, and so therefore we can sell additional sponsorships to those particular stakeholders. And this is and that's personally something I've found very effective for helping to just knock things back in line. We can also go away and again, like I say, we can usually see this fairly early. So let's say within that quarter, we'll know at the beginning of the first month in that quarter if we're looking like we're a little bit shaky. So you've got time for the end of that quarter to maybe organize, maybe a live stream, bring in some sponsors, have an opportunity for some data to be available to those that come in and host, as long as everyone's opted in. And again, you can bump in, $50, $60, $70, $80,000 of additional revenue with the right type of live stream and broadcast. And that can make a very significant difference to a forecast that is falling short. I think, good sales leadership, good sales managers are there, not micromanaging, but at the shoulder of their salespeople. We're all human beings. Salespeople do get very stressed when they're not hitting forecasts. This can sometimes bring a little bit of a fog down. It can also be very very demotivating for salespeople, and then they're not working at peak performance. So it's really the responsibility of sales directors and sales leaders to be that support, to be that guiding light, to really let them and ensure they believe that this forecast is achievable, and to provide solutions to make sure that it is going to be achieved.
Hey, this is Jamie. It wouldn't be a podcast for media sales without a commercial now, would it? No, look, this is a bit of a self-promotion. I've been doing something for the last few months, which I've really been enjoying, which has been contributing an article to every edition of RedTech magazine. Now, RedTech is a specialist trade publication. They are actually published out of Paris, France, but they service all parts of Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, as well as parts of Australia and APAC. It is very much focused on the radio, digital audio podcasting industry. That's an industry I spent 11 years in. It's an industry I continue to be in some way involved in with the Media Sales Mastery podcast. And every issue I'll tackle a different topic, specifically focused on how to better sell media. That is podcasting media, that is digital media in a radio business, or traditional radio as well. Really enjoying doing that. If you want to check it out, it's RedTech, RedTech, RedTech magazine. Now, they have an online version of all the magazines. You can get the physical copy sent to you, and I typically share the articles to read online as well. Feel free to check it out. Give me some thoughts, give me some feedback, and appreciate you supporting everything that we're doing here. What's your opinion in terms of retroactive analysis, going back and looking at a forecast or looking at revenue and looking at historical metrics of performance to then inform a future forecast? So specifically, what sort of insights can you unearth around a close rate, around sales timelines and cycles, around a salesperson's average pipeline that they need to build? Can you talk a little bit about how that whole process might play out?
Yeah, I think it's very important to look at the daily activities of each individual salesperson. there will be, and again, you get a blend in every portfolio of regular clients. So, it's reasonably straightforward to look at managing those accounts, to ensuring that they continue to grow, to looking after the needs of the stakeholders in those organizations, and to continue to create good solutions for that client. It is more challenging when you have really, you're very dependent on new business. So looking at what activities salespeople are doing, I think, rather than we don't tend to look in our teams at minimum call rates or minimum proposals sent or anything quite as sort of prescriptive as that. Having said that, though, and through good sales management, understanding what activities your sales team are doing is a really, really important factor in understanding, if they are not hitting their forecast, if that's an impact on that, or to see that, see what is best practice in terms of being able to hit forecasts and making sure that salespeople do the activities they should be doing. And as salespeople, we're all human, and there are times where we don't want to do the prospecting. We're very, very focused on a particularly large set of major clients with a particularly large amount of spend, with a particularly complex proposal across many different opportunities, maybe events and digital and broadcast and whatever else. So, you can get very, very absorbed into that particular area, and you start to neglect doing new business. You only have so many hours in the day. So I think, again, for us as sales leaders, ensuring that our sales team have the discipline to make sure that they do the things that they need to be doing, not just the things that they enjoy doing or the things that they maybe feel that they're prioritizing. Every now and again, we need to make sure that salespeople are prospecting. And one of the biggest things, and I'm speaking personally as well, Jamie, as a salesperson for many years, prospecting is something which falls by the wayside. And it falls by the wayside for a number of reasons, as I said, because I'm busy dealing with existing clients, because it's uncomfortable, and quite often we can end up shying away from doing the things in life that we find uncomfortable. So building up the the habits of staying a little bit uncomfortable in my role, doing the prospecting. And of course, the more frequent you do the uncomfortable things, the less uncomfortable they become. So I think that that's a critical thing in terms of managing pipeline, and understanding that those things are being done helps. When you know that your sales teams are doing all the activities they need to do, it does help give you confidence around your forecasting and indeed their own. It's a tough job. Now we all work in sales, or we work with salespeople, but it's important to remember how hard it is. You are on a perpetual treadmill. You go from quarter to quarter or month to month or whatever your cycle may be. You're constantly running, but you never really get there. Okay, fair enough. Christmas comes around and we all take a little bit of a break, but we already know that we've got the quarter ahead. When we come back, that we need to be hitting our targets. We never get a respite. And it has a significant toll on salespeople. This is, again, where forecasting is really critical. Your forecasting needs to be realistic in terms of a guiding light and a pathway for your salespeople. If your forecasting is too aggressive, very quickly salespeople start to become burnt out. And this is a huge liability for the individual. It very, very quickly go into a spiraling downward cycle when you do feel burnt out. Very quickly, you don't want to talk to your clients, existing or new, and it's very, very hard to kind of get yourself, to back on track. I think salespeople are very hard taskmasters on themselves. When they know they're not hitting forecasts, it will drive them down. So it's really, really important that we look after our sales teams. It's really important. And for us, what we will typically do, we will run our forecasts and our targets fairly aggressively, and then once every couple of quarters we back off and we allow our salespeople to get some a bit of breathing space. We let them have some wins, and then we'll dial it back up again. But it's a really important consideration.
I completely agree, mate. And I think I was having this conversation the other day that getting burnt out isn't necessarily about working really hard and a lot all the time. Where people typically get burnt out is when they feel like they don't have control over a situation. I mean, I can work hard all day. If I'm engaged in the task and it's energizing and I'm finding it rewarding and fun, I can work as hard as anyone else. It's where I'm working hard, but I don't feel like I've got full control on the outcome. And to my mind, that's where forecasting kind of brings this all to a close. Is, forecasting unearths those insights, and it unearths those pockets of opportunity, and it gives you that full visibility on the health of your marketplace and the health of your activity so that you can actually govern your approach. And what I think is most critical is being able to get rid of the low return stuff. What's the stuff that I'm doing that's not driving me any revenue, that's not driving any impact in market, that's wasting the resources of my company? And what's the stuff that is actually really high return, and how do I do more of that? So I completely agree with you that burnout is a thing we all have to keep an eye on, and hopefully in some small way, whilst it might seem like a tenuous link, forecasting actually can be a very helpful tool in order to actually minimize the risk of burnout with people.
Yeah, you make another good point. I think looking at what your daily practices are is really, really important. And it's sometimes quite hard to really review your own activities, in a balanced way. We all convince ourselves that we're doing things that are important when really, some of the activities that we're doing are not as important as others. Now, this can have, when you're on the front line and when you're running pretty lean as a salesperson, you have to be really honest with yourself and look at the utility of what you're doing. Are you working on dollar effective activities? Are you looking at client servicing, which isn't really client servicing? You're just kind of treading water, and that's a really difficult thing for salespeople to do, and it requires a lot of honesty. And sometimes I think for people who are newer in their role, it's very valuable to get feedback from their sales manager. But this is one of the critical things about being successful, whether it's hitting the forecast the company sets for you, or whether it's being successful in your own esteem and making sure that you're bringing in the most revenue that you can possibly bring in.
It's a great point, and I think the primary responsibility as a sales director is that it's that you have to be able to work with the business to ensure that they set stretching but achievable targets, but you also have to hold the business to account to provide the tools and support to do that. And if those two things are off, you are going to lead it to a team feeling very corroded and very depleted very quick, which is not a place any of us want to be. Look, let's jump into the listener question.
I can't ask my sales manager that.
This one actually has been submitted before, but I wanted to revisit it, Alex, just because I knew we were having you on the show. This guest is from New Zealand, and here it is.
Hey, bro. Got any tips for how to close deals quicker? I feel like the stuff sits in my pipeline forever, and I'm constantly chasing the clients for updates. How do you get them to move a little bit faster?
Short and sweet, Alex, but what do you think about that one? What's your initial impression reflecting on that particular challenge?
Okay, first and foremost, when things have sat in your pipeline too long, it's probably too late to start changing the tempo on that deal. Let it go through the keeper. You can always pick it up later on. What you do need to do is look at the next time that you're engaging with a client, be it, repeat business or a new prospect. You need to look and you need to make sure that you set the tempo of the negotiation. Salespeople need to make sure that things are done quickly. If we dictate the terms and if we're in control of that pace of negotiation, the prospect will follow suit. So you need to cut to the chase quickly. You need to pitch your ideas with energy, and you need to make sure that the client understands that there is an opportunity that needs to be capitalized on. And if we don't move quickly, it's going to go and it's going to move on elsewhere. Make every single opportunity unique. There might be, 120 pages in a magazine, but make every single page of that magazine that you sell unique. I used to sell each page as an individual rather than going, I've got, 25 right-hand pages and 25 left-hand pages. I would sell each page individually, as if it isn't bought there and then, it's gone forever and the opportunity is gone. So it doesn't matter what you're selling, whether it's outdoor, whether it's broadcast, whether it's digital media, or whether indeed it is print. Make every single opportunity unique and make sure you keep that tempo. The final thing is do everything with energy. And this has got to be a sincere and genuine thing. I don't mean, sort of speaking in a sort of a heightened and rapid manner, but you have to have energy in what you do. If you have no energy in your selling, I can promise you there will be no momentum in moving it towards a close. These are my guiding lines.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. I think the point you raised there around there's nothing you can do once it's in the pipeline to accelerate the close. It has to be the result of a really well sequenced, really hygienic sales process. And tempo is so key, absolutely key. I think particularly in the direct sales side of media, finding that cadence from that initial discovery meeting to coming back and presenting the solution to doing the close. I do worry sometimes that we're a little bit too slow with that. We sort of space things out by a week or two. We just kind of let things evolve over a process versus going in with a bit of urgency and being able to really grab that process. Like, at the end of the discovery, look, typically what we do with next steps is we book in another meeting, we do this, and this. When is this, is this time available in your calendar? Like literally not leaving that meeting without having the next one booked. Those types of things are what create momentum and create energy and keep the client engaged in the process, in my strong view, which ultimately leads to a quicker close at the end of the process. Well, look, we've come to the end. We won't tell everyone that this is our second go at recording the podcast because we had a technical glitch, and we won't tell people that I was actually in Sydney this morning, and we should have and could have done this in person, Alex. But before you go, mate, let's hear a little bit more about Momentum Media. What are you guys currently sort of working on, and what's the next 12 months look like in your business? So
the year ahead for us, we're very bullish. We made a major acquisition at the end of this year in 2022. We acquired a major brand in financial services. So we are absolutely all hands to the pump, bedding that down and integrating that into our existing portfolio. And we're very, very excited about that. Looking for the year ahead, we're expecting another year of good growth. We don't have any particular view in terms of how we're going to go about things differently. We are always continually focused on, really one fundamental area, and that is audience. Audience for us is everything. As long as we are engaged with our audience, we deliver excellence in terms of content. What always runs hand in hand with that is that we create huge opportunities for our commercial partners. The pipeline that we deliver content is a really, really powerful and influential channel for our partners to deliver their message and to connect very deeply with their particular target audience. So that's something that we're going to continue to do. Look, I'm not going to get into the sort of the weeds around the economy and inflation and interest rates and so forth. But we're expecting another year of excellent growth and another year of really exciting opportunities.
I love that, mate. I think one of the things I've always admired about your business is the way that you guys are always on the offensive. There's always a new opportunity, a new product, a new market, a new acquisition. There's always some very exciting things happening there. And, I guess the name says it all, Momentum Media. So I'll put a link into the show notes for Momentum. I'll put your LinkedIn in there too, Alex. If this is the first time hearing the podcast with Alex, go back to season 1. He was our guest on targeting relevant advertisers, and I believe you were also our guest on a few other episodes, or at least we've done a few podcasts together with Killer Media Sales, which is the podcast that Momentum Media produced. So, Alex, thanks very much for being here today, and I look forward to getting to Sydney again soon and grabbing a beer with you, mate, and talking shop once again.
Jamie, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much for your time, and for everyone else, thanks very much for listening.